After a 2-year wait, Star Trek: Strange New Worlds is back. This time, the USS Enterprise meets with an even more terrifying cosmic creature. With just a flap of its wings, it can completely destroy nearby warships. Even Captain Pike is transformed into a Vulcan.
Turning back into humans would be illogical. We have chosen to remain Vulcans. Permanently.
How will the crew deal with this series of crises? At the end of Season 2, the conflict between the Enterprise and the Gorn escalated. Chief Medical Officer Joseph and his team went missing while traveling to Gorn territory. At the same time, a Gorn parasitized First Officer Marie. If not treated promptly, the Gorn inside her would soon burst out of her body. Nurse Christine immediately treated her, but Marie had a severe reaction to the serum, narrowly endangering her life. By this point, less than a day remained before the predicted deadline. The crew was very anxious about Marie's condition. If Chief Medical Officer Joseph hadn't gone missing, there might have been more room for hope. Superior David learned about the Enterprise's situation at this time. He decided to declare war on the Gorn, believing that if they didn't show the Gorn some strength, the situation would only worsen. But Captain Pike firmly opposed this. He argued that war would only cost more innocent lives, and that closely monitoring the Gorn was a better way. Although David was very reluctant, he eventually agreed to Pike's suggestion. After seeing David off, Pike immediately gave the order to head to Gorn territory to find Chief Medical Officer Joseph. On the other side, Joseph and the others who were abducted by the Gorn suddenly wake up from their unconsciousness. Security Officer La'an looked around and saw that her fellow crew members, like herself, were all trapped in biopods. She exerted great effort to finally escape from her biopod. She then rescued the other crew members by observing their surroundings. They confirmed that this was the Gorn's digestion chamber. Without La'an, they would have all been completely digested as food. Luckily, the digestion chamber didn't consume metal objects, so their weapons and other equipment remained good. They immediately began searching for an escape route. At the same time, the Enterprise had entered Gorn territory and detected a Gorn ship in the distance. The crew planned to follow it to infiltrate the core star system. Just then, Communications Officer Uhura noticed that the Gorn ship's signal was rapidly weakening. It then suddenly disappeared into an uncharted binary star system. This left the crew stunned. They had never seen anything like this before. They immediately scanned the star system and found that the two stars were unusually active, emitting very strong radiation. Even the ship's energy shields couldn't withstand it. If they rushed in recklessly, the ship and everyone on board would likely be destroyed. At this point, Captain Pike suddenly realized that this might be the reason for the Gorn's disappearances. But the first officer offered a different opinion. According to the data she had, the Gorn's appearances were always accompanied by specific stellar activity. During these times, solar flares from the stars intensified significantly. Therefore, the first officer guessed that this binary star system was the Gorn's stronghold, and their periods of disappearance were actually their hibernation phase. The first officer's speculation was very bold, and Pike didn't dare to make a decision lightly. The first officer then told him that when the Gorn ship disappeared earlier, special signals appeared in the binary star system. This confirmed that the Gorn weren't destroyed by radiation, which was why she made her speculation. But this forced them to face another problem. Based on the current activity level of the binary stars, the Gorn were in their active phase. If they rushed in recklessly, it could easily trigger a conflict. One mistake could even blow up into a full-on war between the Federation and the Gorn. Captain Pike was deeply hesitant. Just then, a Gorn ship suddenly appeared in Pike's field of vision. In the next second, the binary stars erupted with intense solar flares, and the approaching Gorn ship suddenly disappeared right before their eyes. Pike realized something, and immediately ordered the energy shield strength to be maximized. He then ordered the Enterprise to approach the binary star system. As soon as they got close, they discovered that the intense interference from the binary stars had disabled their detection equipment. The interior of the binary star system now acted like a natural barrier. When the Enterprise entered the binary star system, it found that the area was filled with Gorn warships. Possibly alerted by the Enterprise, all the Gorn ships rushed out of the star system, seemingly advancing toward the Federation. Pike realized the danger. If things were allowed to continue, it could easily blow up into a war between the two sides. Pike immediately ordered a retreat, but before leaving, they deployed a communication buoy to make it easier to find this location next time. After leaving the binary star system, Pike remained deeply worried, constantly thinking about how to stop the Gorn invasion. At the same time, in the ship's medical bay, the Gorn inside Marie was about to hatch, but Nurse Christine and Science Officer Spock analyzed numerous treatment methods via Computer and found that Marie's mortality rate was 100% in every case. The root cause was that human physiology was too fragile to withstand many of the treatments. Just as the two were at a loss, Nurse Christine suddenly remembered that the first officer was an alien, and alien plasma had strong anti-infection properties. Perhaps injecting the plasma could boost Marie's immunity, allowing them to use more aggressive surgery to remove the gorn from her body. Spock ran a tentative computer analysis and found that this plan still had an 86% mortality rate, but it was still the most successful method available, so they had no choice but to try. They injected Marie with the first officer's plasma, and prepared for open-body surgery. Marie soon fell into a coma, and just as Christine was about to start the surgery, Spock suddenly stopped her. Just a moment ago, Spock had a much bolder idea. Previously, they had been focused on removing the gorn from Marie's body, but perhaps they never needed to do that in the first place. The reason the gorn burst out of the host's body was that when it reached a certain growth stage, it became very hungry and needed to find food. But if they could feed the gorn, the parasite wouldn't burst out. Then they could take the opportunity to dissolve it with a reagent. After that, they could use the first officer's plasma to help Marie resist any infections, and eventually, her body would absorb the dissolved gorn, solving the crisis without any surgery. But time was urgent, and they had no time to run new simulation calculations. But Christine believed the idea was highly feasible, so the two temporarily changed the treatment plan. After thinking for a long time, Pike also had a sudden inspiration. Recalling the first officer's earlier words, Pike wondered if they could mimic the frequency of stellar radiation, tricking the gorn into thinking it was their hibernation phase, and forcing them to go dormant again. The more Pike thought about it, the more feasible it seemed. He immediately contacted the engine room to ask about the plan's viability. Montgomery, the surviving chief engineer from another ship in the previous season, had now joined the Enterprise crew. He and the current chief engineer, Pelia, jointly studied the plan. After repeated simulations, Montgomery told Pike that the plan had a success rate of less than 1 in 1,000. Besides, if it failed, the whole Enterprise would explode along with it. Upon hearing this, almost everyone thought Pike would give up the plan. After all, it was almost like suicide. Before Pike could announce his decision, they suddenly spotted a large number of gorn ships charging toward them. It was clear the Enterprise had been exposed, and its speed was no match for the gorn warships, so they had no choice but to fight for their lives. Pike ordered them to execute the plan. At the same time, Lon and the others, trapped in the digestion chamber, were also in a very bad situation. After searching, they failed to find an escape exit, but they did discover a ship inside. They planned to take the ship and forced their way out of the digestion chamber. But just as they approached the ship, they were spotted by the guarding gorn. And a fierce battle broke out immediately. Luckily, in the end, the group escaped into the ship without incident, and forced their way out of the area. Lon and the others' actions quickly attracted the attention of more gorn, so a large number of gorn warships rushed toward them quickly. In the nick of time, the Enterprise successfully changed the star's frequency, forcing the raging gorn to get into hibernation again. But helmsman Eli, whose previous injury hadn't yet fully healed, fell into a coma on the spot after experiencing such high-intensity piloting. Luckily, the crisis was resolved, and Lon and the others successfully went back to the Enterprise. Afterward, they hurried to check on Marie upon hearing about her condition, only to find that the gorn inside her had been rooted out. Spock and the others' treatment had succeeded. After this incident, the Enterprise crew planned to take a good rest. Coincidentally, 3 days later would be the 100th anniversary of the Federation's founding, and a celebration would be held on the ship. Upon learning this, Spock immediately found Lon and asked her to teach him to dance. Hoping to dance with Christine at the celebration, during their time together, Spock had already fallen deeply in love with Christine. But just as he was diligently practicing his dance moves, Christine suddenly went back to the Enterprise with a man. This man, named Roger, was Christine's mentor and also her boyfriend. Not long ago, Roger had given Christine a promise bracelet as a token of their love. Roger's main purpose in coming was to accompany Christine to the Centennial celebration. Watching the two show affection for each other, Spock felt a mix of emotions. He went to the bar in disappointment, and drank one glass of wine after another to drown his sorrows. Spock told the bartender how much he liked Christine, and that he hoped to marry her, but he knew all of this was just his own fantasy. But when Spock woke up the next day, he found that the Enterprise was actually preparing for his wedding to Christine. No one sensed anything wrong, including Spock himself. He found La'an to practice dancing as usual, but this time the dance was the opening dance for the wedding. The bartender from the previous night had become the wedding planner. As for Roger, he had become a handyman, in charge of flowers and desserts. Under the planner's arrangement, everyone began to rehearse the next day's wedding procedures, only to find that the flowers had withered due to improper preservation, and for some unknown reason, the desserts were made of chili peppers. It was obvious that Roger was behind all this, but the wedding planner didn't seem to care about this. With a wave of his hand, the flowers bloomed again, and the chili desserts turned into cream desserts. Perhaps as punishment for Roger's earlier actions, the planner kept Roger away from the stage during the rehearsal, but Roger clearly knew something, and kept trying to talk to the bride, Christine. Spock watched the scene unfold. After the rehearsal ended, Spock went to Roger's room and demanded to know what he was up to. Roger immediately said that this wedding should never have existed in the first place. He was Christine's boyfriend. Roger then talked about his love history with Christine and claimed he would ruin the wedding. Spock was enraged by his answer and punched Roger. But after the anger, Spock seemed to break free from some kind of shackle, and many memories surged in his mind. Spock then realized that everything Roger had said was true, and he couldn't understand why he had taken everything as real before. When Roger woke up from his coma, Spock apologized to him solemnly, and then they discussed the strange situation on the ship together. After some analysis, Spock believed that a special life form had most likely infiltrated the ship, causing everyone's memories to be distorted. They decided to stop this wedding that should never have existed. Spock took Roger to the laboratory and used equipment to conduct a full scan of the ship, but found no anomalies. It was clear that the mysterious intruder was more difficult to deal with than they had imagined. But Spock soon came up with another idea. He had broken through the cognitive barrier set by the intruder because of anger, so he could use the same method to wake up the other crew members, and then they could find the intruder together. Just at this point, Lieutenant Kirk approached Spock with several bottles of wine, asking him to choose which one to use for the wedding the next day. But Spock opened his mouth with all kinds of insults, trying to provoke Lieutenant Kirk. Unexpectedly, the other person only thought Spock had pre-wedding jitters, and didn't take it to heart at all. Spock's first attempt failed. He then went to Captain Pike, but met with the same situation. Spock had to try a different way. He then found out that in addition to the crew, there were more than 100 external guests at the wedding. Spock believed the intruder was most likely hiding among them. He then used the computer to verify the names on the list, and found one person with no registration information at all. This person was obviously the intruder. According to the location, the person was currently in the kitchen. Spock and Roger rushed to the target location, only to find that it was the wedding planner. Spock suddenly realized that all the strange changes had started after he drank the wine. Spock demanded that the other person stop the farce immediately, but the planner seemed not to hear him at all. The planner told Spock that they must finish the performance, otherwise, everyone on the ship would be killed immediately. Then the planner snapped his fingers, and the whole ship began to shake violently, as if it was about to collapse. Faced with such a blatant threat from the planner, Spock and Roger had no choice but to obey. The next day, Spock stepped onto the stage with a tangled heart, looking at the bride Christine. His heart was filled with mixed emotions. Although he liked her, this false marriage wasn't what Spock wanted. At this time, Roger was even more upset, not only because he had to sit below and watch Spock marry his girlfriend, but also because he had angered the planner the day before, and was now turned into a bridesmaid. In the end, Roger couldn't hold back and stood up to oppose the wedding, but before he could finish speaking, the planner turned him into a dog. Strangely, no one present found anything unusual about this. As Spock and Christine finished reciting their wedding vows, Christine suddenly came to her senses. Spock seemed to have anticipated all this. Earlier, when Spock tried to provoke others, he had guessed that other extreme emotions might also break through this cognitive barrier. Now Christine's sudden awakening amid intense happiness just proved Spock's guess. Christine looked at the promise bracelet on her wrist, then at the dog over there, and immediately walked over to Roger. When the planner saw that Christine had also escaped his control, he threatened her on the spot to come back and finish the wedding, otherwise, he would kill all the guests present. The guests were immediately stunned. Just as the planner was about to act, a wisp of smoke emitting blue light quietly appeared at the wedding venue. It turned out to be the planner's father. Although the planner looked strong, he was still an underage troublemaker in their race. The blue smoke apologized to everyone and then took his son away. As the father and son left, everyone's consciousness returned to normal. At this point, Captain Pike stepped onto the stage. Although the wedding didn't happen, the stage was already set, so he immediately announced the start of the centennial celebration. Everyone plunged into the new celebration, but Spock's heart felt empty. He still couldn't let go of Christine. Lon noticed Spock's sadness and invited him to dance, hoping to help him forget his troubles. Not long after, the celebration ended, but almost no one noticed that Eli suddenly left the hall in a hurry. She went to the training room and took out her frustration on a punching bag repeatedly. Shortly after, a gorn appeared behind Eli without anyone noticing. It was clear that Eli was hiding some unknown secrets. A long time passed after that, and the crew of the Enterprise threw themselves into their busy work again. Just then, Marie suddenly fainted on the road. Pike hurried to send her to the medical bay. Chief Medical Officer Joseph suspected that the gorn in Marie's body might not have been completely removed earlier, which led to the current situation. To completely remove the residues in Marie's body, he planned to develop a new drug, but this required a very special ingredient, the chimera flower. This flower contains a special component that not only enhances cell membrane permeability, but also quickly wipes out malignant tumors. But this flower is very rare. As far as he knew, it only grew on a planet called Kenfra, but due to a previous war with the Klingon, the ownership of this planet was still disputed. Both sides had established no-fly zones. Therefore, according to regulations, the Enterprise must obtain approval before approaching it. But it was obvious that the approval wouldn't be granted, yet no one could stand by and watch Marie die, so they decided to send a small team to sneak into planet Kenfra, while the Enterprise provided cover from the periphery. Not long after, Pike and Joseph piloted a small shuttle and sneaked into the no-fly zone. The moment they crossed the boundary line, the communication between the shuttle and the Enterprise was completely cut off. To avoid exposing the infiltration, the Enterprise also completely disabled all other communication methods. By this time, the shuttle had reached the planet's orbit, and suddenly they received a warning message.
There was one station near a bomb Klingon line with radiation danger. Loosely translated, it means go back or die.
Captain Pike was immediately confused. This was clearly a restricted area agreed upon by both sides, so why was there such a warning? But they had come to save their comrade, and no matter how dangerous the road ahead was, they wouldn't back down. With that, the two boarded planet Kenfra. Joseph used a detector to confirm that there were no other animals on the whole planet, except the two of them. But right after Joseph finished speaking, they saw a humanoid skeleton not far away. Through observation, they confirmed it was a Klingon skeleton. What puzzled Pike was that the Klingon hadn't died in battle, and instead, he seemed to have been killed by some kind of animal. Yet according to the earlier detection, there should be no other animals on this planet. Before long, the two arrived at an abandoned base, which had long been overrun by plants due to years of neglect, and one of the plants was exactly the chimera flower. Pike was about to step forward to pick the flower, when Joseph stopped him. Joseph then put on a mask solemnly, and picked the flower with a tool. Joseph told Pike that the flower was highly toxic when in bloom. Direct contact would cause immediate death from poisoning, so extreme caution was needed both when picking it and using it later. After successfully obtaining the chimera flower, the two planned to leave immediately. Just then, Pike caught a glimpse of a severed leg in the nearby bushes. The flesh on it hadn't yet fully decomposed, and faint bite marks could be seen. This was obviously abnormal. All signs showed that a terrifying monster was hiding here. At the same time, the Enterprise, which was outside the isolation zone, suddenly detected a Klingon warship breaking into the no-fly zone. The crew realized the danger, but due to the lack of signal in the no-fly zone, they couldn't inform Pike and the others of the situation. The only thing the crew could do was keep a close eye on the Klingon ship on planet Kenfra. Pike and Joseph knew they shouldn't stay long, and planned to leave immediately. A scream suddenly came from outside. It must have been made by an animal, yet even now, the detector still showed no abnormalities. Before they could figure out what was happening, they heard a loud rumble from outside. Only then did they realize that their shuttle had been taken over by someone. Shortly after, several Klingon warriors appeared near the abandoned base. The two hid in a hurry, but the Klingons seemed to know their whereabouts and kept lingering around. Pike thought they couldn't just wait for their fate, and a fierce battle broke out immediately. The noise woke up the monsters on planet Kenfra. In the next second, a zombie-like creature suddenly rushed out of the bushes. The closest Klingon warrior didn't have time to react, and was tackled by the monster. Soon after, more and more zombie-like monsters surrounded them from all directions. The Klingon warriors fought desperately, and Pike took the opportunity to escape from their encirclement. In their panic, the two rushed into a research lab, where they found a computer that could start normally. Only then did they learn what had really happened on planet Kenfra. It turned out that the zombie-like creatures outside were all created by Klingon researchers. They had violated the no-fly zone regulations without permission, and conducted biological experiments on this planet. They used the permeability of the chimera flower to combine the genes of a certain moss and immortal mice, trying to create elite warriors with super adaptability, but the experiment went wrong, and all the test subjects turned into monsters that only devoured living things. Both were shocked by this file, and Pike finally realized how terrifying the Chimera flower really was. Meanwhile, on the Enterprise, Marie's condition worsened again. Spock originally wanted to use a meditative healing method to relieve Marie's pain, but after connecting to her mind, Spock actually saw a monster he had never seen before. Worse still, Spock seemed to be infected too. Luckily, Christine acted in time and woke Spock up from his meditation. At this point, Marie's condition was very critical. Just then, the first officer hurriedly gathered everyone in the conference room. They had just detected that Klingon had boarded planet Kenfra. The first officer was very worried about Pike and the others, so she gathered everyone to hash out a plan. For the worst-case scenario, Science Officer Spock suggested that they could sneak the Enterprise into planet Kenfra by flying in low-gravity mode, because in this state, the ship's frequency would be similar to the surrounding dust particles, making it undetectable by the Klingon. But this would take more than 4 hours to reach planet Kenfra, and by then Pike and the others might already be dead. While the first officer was hesitating, helmsman Eli also expressed her opinion. She believed they should fly the ship at full speed. After all, their main task now was to save people. The two sides held their own opinions, and neither could convince the other. In the end, the first officer decided to adopt Spock's method. Upon hearing this, Eli left on the spot, showing no respect to anyone. Lon was the first to notice something was wrong. She had interacted with Eli a lot and knew that although Eli was prone to emotional outbursts, she had never done anything like this before. There was obviously something fishy going on. The first officer remained silent, and no one knew what she was thinking. On planet Kenfra, before Pike and Joseph could figure out how to escape the zombies' encirclement, the monsters rushed into the research lab. This place was almost a dead end. There was nowhere to run. The two could only hide in a cabinet. Trembling with fear, the zombies outside slammed the cabinet door frantically. After an unknown amount of time, a red light suddenly lit up outside. In the next second, two Klingon warriors opened the cabinet door and captured Pike and Joseph on the spot. Later, the four of them went to the base's rooftop, which was also swarming with zombies, even more ferocious than those downstairs. Luckily, there was a force field emitter here, and energy walls on all four sides kept the zombies out. Pike and Joseph finally breathed a sigh of relief. Pike originally wanted to propose a temporary alliance with the Klingon female warrior to escape together. Unexpectedly, she stabbed him in the thigh with a dagger. Then the warrior looked at Joseph, who was standing aside.
I am Baitha, daughter of Dakra, champion of House Ra'ul.
When Pike and Joseph heard the female warrior's words, they panicked immediately, thinking she had come to avenge her father. But the female warrior said her father was a traitor to the Empire and deserved to die. But she still couldn't forgive Joseph. She was supposed to be the one to get rid of that traitor, but Joseph had beaten her to it. Only by killing him could she restore her family's honor. So the female warrior demanded a duel with Joseph. The two fought fiercely inside the force field barrier, and in the end, the female warrior was no match for Joseph. But Joseph didn't kill her, yet in her eyes, defeat was more terrifying than death, so she pestered Joseph to fight again. Just as Pike and the others felt helpless about this, the force field emitter's energy was completely depleted. The zombies swarmed forward. Just as Pike and the others were in danger, the Enterprise rushed into planet Kenfra at high speed. Seeing this, Pike and the others ran quickly toward the shuttle. The female warrior took the initiative to stay behind to cover their retreat, buying them time to escape. Perhaps for her, dying in battle was more valuable than living in cowardice. In the end, the female warrior was completely devoured by the zombies. While Pike and the others went back to the Enterprise safely, Joseph then immediately used the Chimera flower to treat Marie, although there was no certainty that other problems wouldn't arise later. For now, the symptoms on Marie's body had disappeared. In a place where no one else noticed, the first officer found Eli alone and questioned her about why she had disobeyed orders. Only then did she learn that Eli had deliberately increased the speed during the flight, leading to the Enterprise being exposed. The crew had to change their original plan and rush into Klingon territory at full speed, but it was precisely because of this that they arrived in time to rescue Pike. In the end, the first officer decided to only suspend Eli for a week, as a warning. Not long after, the Enterprise received another mission to assist Dr. Roger in excavating an ancient ruin. At the same time, they also received a filming mission, mainly to record the daily lives of the Enterprise crew, so everyone had to put on cameras and head to Dr. Roger's excavation site. This was an ancient Marconian temple ruin, so a Marconian leader was also present at the excavation site to assist. The moment everyone saw the palace, they were all shocked by its grandeur, but it wasn't easy to enter it.
The path to absolution, only with blood given freely.
According to the Marconian, their race has had a tradition of self-sacrifice since ancient times. So, if nothing goes wrong, someone must sacrifice themselves. Roger originally planned to go himself, but Christine beat him to it. After a drop of blood was shed, the ruin's door opened with a loud crash. A few of them walked in cautiously to explore, but as soon as they stepped inside, their connection with the outside world was cut off. It was clear that this temple held something unusual. As they went deeper, several completely mummified bodies suddenly appeared on the ground. Based on their clothing, they must have been from another expedition team. Science Officer Spock believed there was an obvious danger far beyond normal reason here, and suggested leaving the temple first to plan carefully, but Roger wasn't a member of the fleet, so he insisted on staying. Christine also decided to stay with her boyfriend, and the other members followed suit. As they went further, they found more mummified bodies. Unlike the ones outside, these mummies were at least millions of years old. Just then, they found a strange stone slab on one of the mummies, and a mysterious sphere under the slab. Crew member John looked at the sphere curiously, and his eyes were injured in an explosion. Everyone hurried to send him back to the ship for treatment, only to find that a mysterious force in his wound prevented it from healing. By now, everyone finally realized the seriousness of the situation, but the few who still remained in the temple ruin had now reached the deepest part. They captured footage of a strange object using a drone. The Marconian panicked and fled immediately after seeing it, but before he could reach the temple door, he was burned to ashes by a burst of laser. At this point, the door also closed completely, trapping Spock and the others inside. This sudden turn of events left them completely stunned. Christine, holding on to a glimmer of hope, tried to open the door with her own blood, but there was no response at all. Now they had no way out and could only go deeper, because of what had happened earlier. Everyone was very cautious at this point, but an accident still occurred. When they walked into the last room together, they were shocked to find that they had been quietly separated from each other. Luckily, their communicators still worked normally. They briefly described their surrounding environments and found that except for Christine and Lon, no one else had the frozen statue in the center of their space. If nothing went wrong, this was the reason they had been separated. Upon observation, they found that there were many Marconian characters under the statue, as well as 2 lines of Chinese. It referred to the statue as the Guardian of the Eternal Bridge. Christine curiously took out a detector to scan the statue, only to find that the statue was actually alive. On the other side, Spock and his group also made an unexpected discovery. Although there was no frozen statue here, there were several mummified bodies. Spock found a strange device on one of the bodies. Shortly after, Dr. Rogers said he had finally deciphered the content on the mysterious stone slab they had found earlier. He told Spock to use the strange device they had just found to look for something resembling a deep pit. After some observation, Spock noticed that the nearby altar was emitting a mysterious glow. He guessed that this was the so-called deep pit mentioned on the slab. When Spock approached the top of the altar, he found that it was filled with the same spheres that had injured John. Just then, one of the spheres slowly flew up to the top of the altar. This was clearly the source of the mysterious energy in John. At the same time, the crew on the ship also discovered the secret of the sphere through research. Montgomery said the object was just a storage device, and its outer shell had become very fragile after being away from the energy source for a long time. At this point, the object stored inside suddenly erupted, eventually causing an explosion. Everyone was shocked by this news, because it meant the object stored inside must have self-awareness. At this point, Chief Engineer Pelia's face suddenly turned pale. She seemed to know something, but no matter how everyone asked, she only kept repeating that the thing was very evil and terrifying. Pike realized the danger, and hurriedly led everyone to the medical bay. At this time, something inexplicable was also happening in the medical bay. John suddenly sat up, and muttered to himself about Joseph's daughter. This shocked Joseph deeply, as he had never mentioned this matter to anyone outside his family. The thing controlling John realized it had slipped up, suddenly disappeared, and returned control of John's body to him. John had no memory of what had just happened. Joseph examined him carefully, and made an even more terrifying discovery. The test results showed John was brain dead, yet he was sitting there perfectly fine. Even John himself couldn't understand this result. Seemingly, Stimulated by this, John showed signs of rage. Joseph quickly restrained him with a sedative. Just then, Marie, who had been parasitized by the Gorn before, suddenly walked into the medical bay. The mysterious parasitic creature in John seemed to be stimulated by something, and immediately took control of John to attack Marie. Marie also seemed to be controlled by some force, and became very violent. A fierce fight broke out between them. Luckily, Pike and the others arrived just in time. The monster controlling John saw the situation was bad, hastily injured Montgomery and fled. They chased after it immediately, only to see John holding a crew member hostage. To avoid provoking the creature, they could only keep persuading. John finally released the crew member. Pike then immediately arranged for John to be detained, to prevent him from harming others again. Communications officer Uhura accidentally discovered that the 6 of them were actually in the same space, but for some reason, they were separated into different dimensions and thus couldn't see each other. She immediately told the others this news. Combining this with the content Roger had deciphered from the stone slab, everyone guessed this place might be an eternal prison, used by the ancient Marconians to hold prisoners. They didn't want to be trapped here forever like prisoners. Just then, they noticed something seemed missing from the altar. Roger placed the stone slab on it based on the shape, and it fit perfectly. In the next second, a stone slab appeared in Christine's dimension. Shortly after, Uhura placed a ring Roger had found earlier on the altar. Then another identical ring appeared in Christine's dimension. She pressed both into the empty slots on the altar. The dimensional barrier between them disappeared completely. But before they could celebrate, they discovered a new problem. The bridge leading to the room was gone, and the original door stood suspended in mid-air. At this time, Spock noticed that the injury on his hand had suddenly disappeared. While he was confused, Spock suddenly felt a pain. The wound had reappeared, yet these two trivial matters allowed Spock to deduce the true principle of this space. He believed the space was constructed using reverse causality, meaning the effect came before the cause, so the bridge hadn't disappeared. It just hadn't appeared yet because they hadn't walked across it. Later, at Spock's request, everyone lined up in the order they had entered, and walked toward the door. This was undoubtedly a very risky idea, but everyone chose to trust Spock. As they stepped toward the door, the bridge actually appeared. In this way, everyone finally escaped the ruin. On the Enterprise at this time, Marie told Pike that she had felt a mysterious force in John earlier, which seemed to awaken the Gorn genes in her body. This was why she had become violent. Moreover, Marie claimed she could feel that John was now completely controlled, and no longer the comrade he used to be. Pike only remained silent, as he could also feel that something was wrong with John now. Before he could figure out how to deal with John's situation, another accident happened. The mysterious parasite in John actually controlled him to knock out the guard, then broke into the engine room with a gun, and threatened Pelia and others to hand over control of the ship. Luckily, Joseph arrived just in time to stop John from succeeding. Seeing the plan fail, the mysterious creature even begged Joseph for mercy. Then, taking advantage of Joseph's inattention, it immediately left John's body. Luckily, Montgomery reacted quickly and trapped the creature again with the previous sphere. Shortly after, Montgomery used the teleportation device to throw the sphere into space. Without the parasite controlling him, John died completely. Everyone was deeply saddened by the loss of their comrade. Joseph felt the most guilty. If he hadn't interceded for John earlier, John would never have been transferred to the field team or took part in this excavation. But it was too late to say anything now. In his sorrow, Joseph didn't notice a strange flicker on the equipment in the medical bay. At the same time, in a star system not far from the Enterprise, a ship named the Farragut was scanning a planet. Cadet Captain Jim was interning on this ship. He always looked down on the current Captain Frere, thinking she was too rigid in her work and had no sense of adventure. Jim believed he could do a much better job than Frere if he were in charge. As Jim continued to complain inwardly, a strange fluctuation suddenly appeared on the planet in front of them. Before anyone could react, a violent explosion occurred. The Farragut was severely damaged on the spot. Captain Frere fell into a coma. Jim quickly sent out a distress signal. The Enterprise soon received a mission to rescue the Farragut. With the warp engines running at full power, they reached the Farragut in no time. The Enterprise maximized its energy shield power to protect the severely damaged Farragut from space debris. The Enterprise then sent a support team to board the Farragut for rescue operations. Nurse Christine immediately provided aid to the injured. Former Chief Engineer Montgomery rushed to the engine room to repair the engines. The remaining 3, including Spock, assisted Jim in handling various matters on the bridge. Everything was running in an orderly manner. Later, they learned about how the Farragut had been severely damaged. Communications officer Uhura immediately pulled up the ship's data from that time, and discovered that a very powerful energy beam had attacked the planet before the explosion, causing the planet to detonate. But what surprised her was the enormous power of the energy beam. Even the main cannons of the Federation fleet weren't in the same league as it. She couldn't imagine what kind of massive object could produce such power. Just then, the ship's communication system was suddenly interfered with by an unknown force. Uhura initially thought the temporary communication channel was just unstable, but the next second she was shocked by the scene outside. The size of that ancient spaceship was 1,000 times that of the Enterprise. All the weapons on the Enterprise had no effect when fired at it. In the end, they could only watch helplessly as the Enterprise was swallowed by it. Jim was shocked by what he had just seen, and at this point, he finally realized his own shortcomings. He wanted someone to bring Captain Frere to him, to ask her how to handle the situation. But Christine told him that because Frere's injuries were too severe, she had been transported to the Enterprise for surgery. Now Jim was the only commander on the Farragut. On the other side, after being swallowed, the Enterprise was tightly wrapped by countless mechanical tentacles. The tentacles kept squeezing the ship and absorbing the energy inside the Enterprise. If they didn't break free soon, their only fate would be to become spaceship wreckage and merge into this space graveyard. But Pike had never seen anything like this before, so he also had no idea how to escape. Just then, the first officer suddenly remembered something, and then told a legend about the Star Eater. Since this creature only appeared on the Federation's border, basically only people from the border had heard of it. Pike had always lived in the core region before, so it was perfectly normal that he hadn't heard of it. After understanding their current situation, Pike immediately went to the engine room, planning to first get rid of the tentacle that was constantly absorbing the ship's energy. On the way, he met Chief Engineer Pelia, and only then learned that communication between the engine room and the bridge had been completely cut off. If they didn't find a way to solve this problem, even if they got rid of the tentacle, the control room would still be unable to send instructions to the engine room. At this point, Pelia said she had a solution. She liked collecting strange antiques. Among them were some outdated wired telephones. As long as they connected the control room and the engine room with telephone lines, they could communicate normally. At the same time, on the Farragut, Jim ordered a rescue mission for the Enterprise, but their ship was almost completely destroyed. It couldn't even achieve warp speed, so it couldn't catch up with that huge vessel at all. The crew advised Jim to be cautious, and first report to headquarters to request rescue, but Jim thought it would be too late by then, so he decided to take a risky gamble. Jim went to the engine room and asked Montgomery if he could make a simple repair to the engine to enable temporary warp flight. Montgomery said Jim's idea was very dangerous. If something went wrong under those conditions, the engine could no longer be repaired. It would have to be replaced at a starport base. But Jim insisted on activating the warp engine, so Montgomery had to obey the captain's order. Soon, the severely damaged Farragut was activated again, and chased the Star Eater through warp space. Just as they were about to catch up, the ship suddenly dropped out of warp space. Montgomery rushed to the bridge and reported that all the plasma pipes had burst, and the warp engine was completely destroyed. Now it was impossible for them to catch up with the Star Eater. They could only watch helplessly as the Enterprise was swallowed. The only thing everyone could do now was escape to a nearby space station before the Star Eater found them. To avoid becoming its prey, Jim was naturally unwilling to accept this result. This was his first time as captain, and he actually had to make such a cruel decision. The enormous pressure pushed his mental state to the limit, and his emotions also became somewhat unhinged. Christine, with her rich medical experience, keenly noticed that Jim was in a bad state, so after Jim left the bridge, she told everyone that if Jim continued to be stubborn, she would revoke his captain's authority. Just then, Communications Officer Uhura stood up to object. She had interacted with Jim several times before, and back then, Jim always made the most correct decisions in critical moments. Even Captain Pike had praised him repeatedly, so Uhura believed that, as long as they helped Jim relieve his stress, he could return to his previous state. In the end, everyone decided that Spock, who was proficient in meditation, would go to comfort Jim. Not long after, Spock found Jim, who was in a daze, and kept encouraging and affirming him. With great effort, he helped Jim regain his confidence. After regaining his confidence, Jim was like a different person. He carefully analyzed the current situation, he decided to stop chasing the ancient fleet, and instead wait for the prey to come to him. Jim arranged for Montgomery to fill the burst plasma pipes with a special type of ore. This substance produces a large amount of high-energy particles. When it decays, the Star Eater loves to devour high-energy objects the most, so it will definitely be attracted to the ship, and when that happens, it will fly towards them on its own. At the same time, Pike and the others trapped inside the Star Eater finally reached the engine room, only to find two intruders guarding it. A fierce battle broke out immediately, but they discovered that the intruders wore a special device that made them completely immune to phaser fire. Seeing the situation was bad, Pike and his group decided to retreat first and plan carefully later, but the two intruders clearly didn't plan to let them go, and chased after them. Captain Pike took the opportunity to launch a surprise attack, and smashed one intruder's absorption device. Without this protection, a single phaser shot took the intruder down. The other intruder turned and fled without hesitation. Although they had scared off this intruder, the ship's crisis wasn't resolved. The tentacles were still absorbing anti-energy. Pike suggested using baryons to cut the tentacles, but this required going to the ship's waste compartment to extract them. Upon hearing this, Lon set off immediately, and soon returned with a barrel of baryons. As Pike and the others dealt with the energy-absorbing tentacle, Pelia and the others also completed the telephone line connection. The Enterprise quickly broke free from the tentacle's control. At this time, the Star Eater was also attracted by the Farragut, and arrived in the nearby star system. Seeing that the Star Eater had indeed taken the bait, Jim immediately ordered the jettison of the two plasma pipes. The detached pipes hit the Star Eater accurately, like two space torpedoes. The intense energy released even caused the Star Eater to be temporarily paralyzed. Taking this opportunity, the Enterprise quickly escaped from the Star Eater. Seeing that their comrades had escaped, Jim immediately ordered the launch of plasma torpedoes. The torpedoes hit the interior of the Star Eater accurately, triggering a massive explosion. Just as everyone was cheering for this victory, the radar suddenly showed more than 7,000 lifeforms inside the Star Eater, and they were even flying the American flag. This turn of events left everyone at a loss. On the other side, the intruder who had escaped earlier was also found on the Enterprise, and it turned out that there was a human face under his mask. It turned out that many years ago, researchers had realized that Earth would be in crisis, so they created the Star Eater to lead humans to flee to other planets for refuge. But later, due to various accidents, Earth lost contact with the Star Eater, leading to the current situation. Because of the Star Eater incident, the Enterprise had to undergo large-scale maintenance, but luckily, this didn't take much time. 3 days later, the Enterprise set sail again, and the crew received a new mission: to escort the Lutani's secret weapon Starlight to an active war zone. Pike and the others rushed to the designated planet, and when they activated the tractor beam, a huge creature suddenly emerged from the ocean. At the same time, Lutani warships also appeared in the nearby area. Pike and the others thought they had come only to escort, but the Lutani suddenly launched an attack on Starlight. The giant creature was enraged instantly, and in the next second, a massive energy shockwave attacked all nearby targets without discrimination. The Lutani warships that were closer were destroyed on the spot, and almost all crew members on board were killed. The Enterprise, being farther away, narrowly escaped destruction, but its power system suffered a severe failure. Instead of immediately investigating why the Lutani had suddenly attacked, Pike and his team adhered to the principle of humanitarianism and rescued the surviving Lutani who were severely injured. They also took the opportunity to ask why the Lutani had suddenly attacked Starlight. The severely injured Lutani was on the verge of death. Almost all his skin had been burned in Starlight's ultra-high energy attack just now. The medical equipment on the Enterprise couldn't handle this situation, and the emergency medicine on board was a deadly poison for the Lutani, so it couldn't be used either. Only Spock could try to use the power of meditation to temporarily ease the wounds on the Lutani's body. The Lutani grabbed Joseph's arm and, with his last strength, told them they must destroy Starlight, for it was the Lutani's most terrible mistake. After saying this, he died in extreme pain. Everyone was shocked by the scene before them, and they realized that if Starlight were deployed on the battlefield, more people would die in such extreme pain. On the other side, Communications Officer Uhura discovered that Starlight's attack just now carried a segment of audio. Perhaps it was trying to convey something to them, so Uhura had been trying to isolate the audio. Just then, Starlight began to struggle violently, and it seemed about to break free from the tractor beam. Later, everyone discovered that the inhibitor embedded in Starlight's body had been damaged in the Lutani's attack just now, and now they could no longer control the giant creature. Pike immediately gave the order, activate the backup plan to regain control of Starlight. To their surprise, but they found that Starlight was continuously emitting random electromagnetic fields around it, making it impossible for them to lock onto it. Worse still, the Enterprise itself was also disrupted. Because it couldn't match the target frequency, many systems failed one after another. Captain Pike could only order, move away from Starlight and track, and monitor the target from a distance. As the Enterprise moved away, Starlight broke free completely. Thinking about the damage this giant creature might cause, the crew suggested using weapons to kill it, but Pike appeared very hesitant. He had never forgotten the mission assigned to them, so after a moment of thought, Pike ordered, install the new inhibitor into a torpedo. He planned to use this method to reattach the inhibitor to Starlight, and then regain control of it. This plan was very dangerous. If it failed, it would definitely enrage Starlight completely, and the earlier destruction of the Lutani warships was a warning of what could happen. At this point, Uhura proposed a more peaceful approach. She wanted to use the audio obtained earlier to analyze Starlight's language pattern, and then calm Starlight through communication. But in a way, this was a riskier plan than attacking with weapons. In the end, Pike rejected Uhura's proposal. When Starlight entered the firing range, he immediately ordered the torpedo to be launched, and the inhibitor hit Starlight accurately, but it had no effect. The Enterprise's attack completely enraged Starlight, and it unleashed another high-energy shockwave. If they hadn't maximized the power of the energy shield in advance, the ship and everyone on board would have been destroyed by now. Even so, the Enterprise was nearly destroyed again, and many systems were completely paralyzed. Helplessly, Pike could only try Uhura's previous proposal, but he made a few modifications. Spock would pilot a shuttle to Starlight's side and establish a mental connection between the two parties. Spock was on the verge of success, but just then, another Lutani warship broke into the area. Given their previous experience, no one on the Enterprise could be sure if the Lutani would open fire on Starlight. Spock was right next to Starlight at this point. If a battle broke out between the two sides, his death would be almost certain. Perhaps Starlight remembered the Lutani warship had attacked it before, so it immediately launched an active attack. Spock fell into a coma on the spot, his life hanging in the balance. But what the Enterprise crew couldn't understand was that Starlight suddenly stopped attacking and kept circling the Lutani warship, as if treating it as an ally. Everyone guessed that Spock's mental communication might have taken effect just now, but due to some accident, Starlight had mistaken the Lutani warship for a friendly party, hence the current situation. Regardless, at least Starlight had finally calmed down. Just then, Joseph made a major discovery. After analyzing Starlight's data, he found that the giant creature's brain had been modified by the Lutani, turning the docile Starlight into a very violent one. This modification also caused immense pain to Starlight. After hearing this, Uhura felt great sympathy for Starlight's plight, and offered to communicate with it via brainwaves. Everyone immediately urged her to calm down, because for humans to communicate with a cosmic giant via brainwaves, a brainwave amplifier was necessary, and this device would cause severe damage to the human brain. But Uhura insisted on her decision, and the others had no choice but to agree. Soon, Uhura established a connection with Starlight, only to be told that Starlight wanted the Enterprise to attack it. It turned out Starlight had long wanted to be freed, so it could break the shackles set by the Lutani. Starlight's only wish was for Pike and the others to protect the safety of its cub, who hadn't been modified and was currently hiding on the ocean planet they had visited earlier. Pike and the others agreed to Starlight's request. After firing at it, they quickly flew toward the nearest star. In the end, Starlight disappeared into the light of the star. Starlight's story filled everyone with emotion, but the next second they received a new mission, a commission from the Vulcans. Hundreds of years ago, the Vulcans had saved a planet on the brink of destruction, providing its people with many technologies to help them continue living. Now, the nuclear power plant they had left behind was due for repairs, but due to various accidents, the Vulcans couldn't go there temporarily, and had to entrust the Enterprise to go in their stead. The Vulcans told Pike and the others that the planet had no spacefaring technology and no knowledge of the Federation's existence, so they couldn't go there as Federation members. Additionally, the planet had very advanced scanning technology, so Pike and his team had to disguise themselves as Vulcans, otherwise, they wouldn't be able to enter at all. Luckily, Spock had previously developed a disguise transformation technology. As Pike and the others injected the Vulcan potion, all four of them, except Pelia, turned into Vulcans, so Pelia was left on the ship to keep watch, while the others went to the planet to carry out the mission. Not long after, the team went back to the Enterprise. Joseph immediately injected them with the antidote, but after waiting for a long time, Pike and the others still didn't return to their original forms. everyone immediately realized the danger. If they couldn't neutralize the potion in Pike and the others' bodies, they would remain Vulcans forever. To prevent any accidents from happening before the antidote was developed, the first officer temporarily took over the captain's position and forbade them from leaving the Enterprise. Since turning into Vulcans, the mental states of the four had also been quietly changing. The most obvious change was in Pike. He actually believed he was a full-blooded Vulcan, and deeply looked down on Spock, who only had half Vulcan blood, even refusing to communicate with him. More than necessary, Christine's transformation was equally dramatic. After turning into a Vulcan, she found that she didn't need rest at all, so she stayed in the laboratory all day to conduct her research. During this period, her boyfriend Roger had called to check on her, but Christine believed that her prime years shouldn't be wasted on romantic love, and resolutely broke up with him. Seeing that the situation of the four was getting worse, and the antidote was still nowhere in sight, the first officer finally decided to ask for external help. The person she turned to was her ex-boyfriend, a Vulcan spiritual master. With his help, everyone finally developed the antidote. The others injected it one after another, and returned to their original forms. Only Lon, who had become very paranoid and aggressive during this period, would lash out at the slightest disagreement. She believed staying in Vulcan form was excellent, and that the antidote was an attempt to harm her. Spock analyzed that Lon had never shown a desire to become a Vulcan before, so her current state was just due to the potion's influence. He tried to communicate with Lon, but it escalated into a fierce fight. Luckily, he finally gained Lon's trust, and she willingly took the antidote to return to her original self. Not long after, the Enterprise received another mission to investigate a specific star system. Obvious gravitational anomalies had appeared here, but no matter how they scanned, they couldn't find the source, so they decided to send Eli to pilot a shuttle for an in-depth investigation, and they specially modified the shuttle for this purpose. Before departure, Uhura told Eli that communication would likely be disrupted once she got into that area, and urged her to be careful. Eli was very excited about this solo mission, but shortly after she set off, the shuttle began to shake violently, and then lost all contact with the Enterprise. At the same time, the Enterprise was also experiencing the same turbulence, and they suddenly noticed a wormhole had appeared ahead. Eli's shuttle was swallowed by it, and disappeared completely from the star system. Meanwhile, Eli, who had passed through the wormhole, still didn't understand her current situation. When she found she couldn't contact the Enterprise, she chose to record audio and send her coordinates, hoping to attracting her comrades' attention. Just then, the shuttle collided with an asteroid belt and crashed onto a planet. When Eli woke up again, her first move was to try to restart the shuttle, but the shuttle had been severely damaged in the crash, and almost all systems were completely paralyzed. Eli had to wait for rescue inside the shuttle. Considering she didn't know how long she'd have to hold on, she used equipment from the shuttle to make a simple condensation device. With this, she could at least survive longer. She then took her toolkit and prepared to go outside to hunt for food, only to find the planet seemed to be made up of nothing but rock. On the other side, the Enterprise never gave up on Eli, but they had too little data about the wormhole to determine the location of its exit. Besides, since the entrance was also changing, they couldn't follow her through it. Uhura tried to search over a wide range using a special frequency, but due to the wormhole's special effects, this method had very limited results. Additionally, the Enterprise now had another mission to deliver vaccines, so their time was very limited. Eli was walking across the desolate Gobi when she suddenly felt a strange tremor. Her system showed it wasn't an earthquake. At this point, Eli noticed that a distant planet was unusually large. After calculations, she realized the planet she was on was its moon, and in just a few hours, the moon would pass through the giant planet's thermosphere, which was filled with toxic gases and electric arcs. If she couldn't escape within a few hours, she would definitely die on this moon. Just then, Eli saw a faint light flash in the distance, and she hurried toward that direction in excitement. Soon, Eli reached the cave. There were clear signs of human habitation, but the owner didn't seem to be there now. Eli looked around with her binoculars, and spotted a mysterious figure not far away. But when she saw clearly, she was shocked. It was actually a gorn. Eli immediately fled the cave and hid, narrowly avoiding being caught on the spot. At the same time, the Enterprise finally made a breakthrough. Uhura detected a signal from the other side of the wormhole, which was the distress recording Eli had sent earlier. But because wormholes cause distortion, Spock suspected the signal didn't actually come through the wormhole. To confirm the exact source of the signal, They decided to launch a probe to the other side, to strengthen the signal connection, but this inevitably brought them back to the original problem. They were pressed for time, and no one could be sure when they would be able to send the probe. Meanwhile, more than 4,000 children on another planet were in need of the vaccines they were transporting. In the end, Captain Pike decided to give Uhura only 4 hours. If they still couldn't find Eli by then, they would have to give up. At this time, although Eli was hiding outside the cave, the Gorn still found her with its keen sense of smell. Just as Eli thought she was doomed, a strange creature suddenly crawled out of a crack in the ground, and the Gorn actually shifted its focus and let Eli go. Later, through observation, she found that the Gorn had a wound on its leg, and the strange creature was its food. Just then, the Gorn threw her a piece of meat. Although she didn't know what the other person meant, Eli decided to fill her stomach first. After eating and drinking its fill, the Gorn lay down and fell asleep. At this point, Eli noticed that the machine above it was a Gorn communication device. Maybe she could use it to contact the Enterprise, so she took the opportunity to steal the device. Just as Eli was rushing back to the shuttle, the ground shook strangely again, and the shuttle actually fell into a crack. Eli had to return to the Gorn's cave. Unexpectedly, many of those strange creatures suddenly rushed out of the surrounding cracks. In the nick of time, the Gorn, who should have been fast asleep, suddenly appeared and saved Eli in time. She didn't understand why the Gorn had saved her, but to thank it for saving her life, she decided to treat the wound on its leg. During their time together, she saw the Gorn's helmet and learned that it had once been a Gorn pilot who had arrived here by accident just like her, but gesturing with hands was too inefficient. So Eli used the surrounding equipment to make a simple translator. Through communication, Eli discovered that the Gorn was a very intelligent female. As they communicated, their relationship grew closer. Later, Eli used the equipment here to make another simple distress signal transmitter. She planned to take the Gorn with her when she left. Upon hearing this, the Gorn seemed to hesitate. Through communication, Eli learned that the Gorn was worried that after leaving, it would be despised by its own kind for being too weak, due to its injury. After all, the Gorn destroy whatever they despise, but Eli couldn't bring herself to abandon the Gorn. She wanted to let the crew know that not all Gorn were so vicious. To dispel the Gorn's doubts, Eli worked harder to collect medicine to treat its leg wound. On the other side, Uhura finally confirmed the source of the signal. Everyone immediately piloted the Enterprise through the wormhole to rescue Eli. When they arrived in this unfamiliar star system, they had to face another question: how to find Eli's location among the 400 planets in this star system. At the same time, Eli's energy shield dissipated due to energy depletion. Seeing that she was about to enter the planet's thermosphere, she decided to take a desperate gamble, using her last remaining energy to ignite the planet's atmosphere. At the moment of planetary friction, to attract her comrades' attention, she firmly believed that her comrades wouldn't give up on her. At the same time, after scanning 200 planets, Pike still hadn't found any trace of Eli. Just as they thought they would lose Eli forever, Uhura suddenly noticed that the atmosphere of one planet was completely ignited. Everyone was convinced this must be Eli's distress signal, and the Enterprise crew rushed to that planet immediately. They successfully found Eli in the ruins, but the moment they saw the Gorn, they shot it dead without hesitation. Eli's mental state almost collapsed completely at this point, and her comrades were about to take her back to the ship. But just then, time seemed to freeze for everyone except Eli. In the next second, a glowing bald man appeared out of thin air. He called himself a Metron. The Metrons had become an advanced civilization beyond human imagination, even before humans learned to walk on two legs. This star system was part of their jurisdiction, and everything that had happened earlier was just a small experiment of his. Eli and the Gorn's actions made him believe there was still hope for the two races, but her comrades' brutal behavior made him very disappointed. So he would observe humans for a little longer, and he would erase Eli's memory of him. As soon as the man finished speaking, time began to flow again. Back on the ship, Eli stared at the small chess piece the Gorn had given her earlier, falling into a long silence. A few days later, Pike's wife Marie finally went back to the Enterprise. After months of meetings, she learned that Christine had officially confirmed her relationship with Dr. Roger, but since it was a long-distance relationship, Marie didn't know what to say for a moment. At this time, Christine's boyfriend Dr. Roger was on a distant planet, investigating the aftermath of the earlier temple. To do this, he had to meet with the local ruler, a high priest. Unexpectedly, the person who appeared before him was the already deceased John. At the same time, Joseph and his team discovered during their inspection of the medical bay that someone had used the medical transporter, but the data had been destroyed. Luckily, Montgomery had extraordinary skills and recovered the data. only to find that the person transported was actually John. Everyone was shocked instantly. This meant that the parasite from before hadn't only reoccupied John's body, but also transported him to somewhere. Later, everyone also learned that Dr. Roger had suddenly lost contact 12 hours earlier. Everyone believed this wasn't coincidence, but considering there were many alien races hostile to the Federation on that planet, the Enterprise could only send a small team to sneak in for rescue. Joseph and 4 others disguised themselves and arrived on the planet. They knocked out the guards to sneak into the building smoothly, and successfully met Dr. Roger. At this time, on the Enterprise, everyone suddenly discovered that on the day John died, the parasite had not only used the transporter to send the resurrected John away, but also most likely transported other of its kind that had been trapped in the ruins to that planet. If this was the case, Joseph and the others would be in extreme danger. John walked among the crowd, using a mysterious language to control the people around him, ordering them to hold a fanatical sacrifice, and preparing to turn all the people into hosts for other parasites. At the same time, the group that had reunited with Dr. Roger also discovered that the trapped creatures might have arrived on this planet, and they also found a section of strange text. Joseph found that the text actually recorded the story of his life. No one could understand why this was the case. Joseph claimed this was fate's arrangement for him. In the next second, the metal block covered in text suddenly revealed a portal, seemingly attracting Joseph to enter. The first officer tried to stop him, but at this point, John suddenly rushed out from the side and pushed Joseph into the portal. The portal then disappeared immediately. The portal transported Joseph and John back to the temple again. Joseph didn't understand why the other person had brought him here, so the parasite and John told him the original captors had set this place so that no one could pass through alone, so he had to bring someone in to free his people. He had discovered Joseph's uniqueness from John's memories, which was why he had plotted to lure him here. In the next second, John started an attack on the Eternal Guardian statue, but for some unknown reason, Marie, who was still on the ship, suddenly had the same wound appear on her body. Then her eyes transformed to look like a sea of stars. Christine immediately examined Marie and discovered that Marie had formed a connection with the temple's statue. Now, in a sense, she was the statue. Pike had never heard of such a strange thing, and had no idea how to handle it. In the temple on the other side, John seemed surprised to see that the statue hadn't been completely shattered. Just as he was about to attack again, Joseph suddenly spoke up to stop him, and threatened John with death if he dared to act. This place required people to enter in pairs. If Joseph died, John would also be trapped here forever. John rushed forward to stop him, but Joseph took the opportunity to push him out of the room. The door closed, separating them completely. Neither could leave alone. On the Enterprise, after analysis, everyone guessed that Marie might have not only Gorn genes, but also human and alien ancestry, and the Chimera flower had caused these genes to fully fuse. All these races had legends of fighting evil, and the imprisoned creatures might be one form of that legendary evil. Coincidentally, the races in her genes all carried genetic memories of resisting this evil, so when the parasites tried to break free, Marie's racial genes were activated, leading to the current situation. While this theory sounded absurd, it was indeed possible. Pike was completely shocked by this news, and didn't know what to say. He couldn't bear to let his wife take the risk, but the galaxy was now in danger, and Marie might be the only one who could solve it. No matter how reluctant he was, he couldn't stop her, but he could stay by her side until the very end. The two approached the portal and found that it seemed only John and Joseph could open it. Pike planned to use enough energy to force the portal open, but after precise calculations, Spock found that opening the portal would require draining an whole star of its energy, something nearly impossible. But Chief Engineer Pelia said there was a way. The Enterprise's main cannons could provide about half the required energy. If another starship fired its main cannons at the same time, the two energy blasts could perfectly overlap to meet the requirement. But if the firing time was off by even a millisecond, the energy collision would blow up the whole planet. While this method was very dangerous, they had no other options. Later, Spock contacted Jim, the cadet captain of the Farragut, to request assistance. Jim thought it was too risky, but Spock said Vulcan mind meld could ensure synchronization. After a moment of hesitation, Jim decided to take part in this legendary operation that would go down in history. As both ships aimed their main cannons at the portal, two laser blasts hit the target accurately, forcing the portal open. Marie and Pike successfully got into the temple. Just then, John also broke through the door and appeared in front of them. Every time he attacked the statue, the same wound would appear on Marie's body. Under this constant stimulation, soft light began to emanate from Marie's hands. Then everyone fell into an illusion. In this illusion, Marie and Pike lived a long life together. From falling in love to growing old, John tried to destroy this illusion, and took the opportunity to release all his kind, but Marie's heart was filled with light and love, and this was the key to defeating John. The released parasites were instantly defeated by the energy erupting from Marie and re-imprisoned in the altar. John tried to resist, but it was useless. He was finally imprisoned in the pit with the others. In the end, Marie transformed into a statue and resealed them. Pike stared at the statue his wife had become, falling into a long silence. After that, Pike was in a daze every day. He knew his wife might never come back, but Marie would live forever in his heart. The film ends here. Star Trek: Strange New Worlds Season 3 was released this July. This may be the last installment in the series, but the first 5 episodes are pretty disappointing. The characterizations are all over the place, and the visuals are worse than before too. But starting from the 6th episode, the plot becomes surprisingly good. Overall, while it's not as good as the first 2 seasons, it still reaches an excellent level. If you like my channel, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe.